Thank you for joining us, everybody. We're here for a conversation with the creative team of Deep Blue Sea. This is Salon that's being presented here by Wingspace and New York Live Arts. My name is Adrian Jones. I'm a scenic designer and a member of Wingspace. And my co-producer, Elizabeth Mack, will be giving us a few pointers and tips on how this evening will proceed. Thank you. Elizabeth, take it.
Great, thank you, Adrian. So my name is Elizabeth Mack, and I'm a member of Wingspace. So this is a Wingspace salon, and we like to start with a quick Zoom tutorial and some of Wingspace's community agreements and our land acknowledgement. So for those of you whose first time it is to Wingspace salon, welcome. Wingspace is an organization of theater artists, and our mission is to foster conversation on design, as well as to further activism in the field. Our salon series, currently our virtual salon series, happens every Thursday evening. And it's one of a number of initiatives led by our membership, in addition to our mentorship program and our newly formed relief fund. So I'm sure everyone's been spending a lot of time on Zoom, but just in case you haven't, we ask that you mute your audio unless you're a guest speaker, and we'll give you the option to unmute as needed. We also ask, unless you're a guest speaker, please turn your video off. And in the top right-hand corner, that's the speaker versus gallery view toggle, based on whether you just want to see the person who's talking or you want to see all the guest speakers. This salon will have 3 parts. So the first part is we'll invite our panelists to respond to some pre-prepared questions. So if you have any questions that you'd like to ask during this section, please post them to the private chat window to Adrian. You'll see Adrian Jones, and Adrian will raise the questions as appropriate. And then the second part, starting around 7 o'clock, will be a live Q&A. So you can either turn on your video and then raise your physical hand, or you can raise a virtual hand to alert Adrian when you want to speak. And then the last 30 minutes, from 7:30 to 8 p.m., we like to leave open the Zoom salon for just open mingling and chatting. And then the last thing is that we've synced our Zoom account with Otter, which is a live transcription service. So if you would like the aid of closed captions during the salon, you can go to the top left-hand corner of your screen, click the drop-down button, and then you'll see this view live transcription thing. We are recording this session, just to let everybody know. And then I would like to read to you our community agreements. So firstly, we ask that during the salon, you be respectful of others and practice active listening. We ask that you speak from your own experience, and that what's learned here leaves here, but what's said here stays here, which means share lessons, but not names. We ask that you assume good intentions, but center the impact instead of the intentions. And lastly, in this time, we ask that you also, of course, practice self-care and community care. If any of the salon participants violate any of these community agreements, we reserve the right to actually ask you to leave, just in case of any Zoom bombing. So we have a Wingspace member, Edward Morris, who will be handling security in this time. Wingspace's land acknowledgement is that Wingspace wishes to pay respect to the many indigenous tribes of New York, in particular the Lenape people. And we acknowledge that the city and nation was founded upon exclusions and erasures of many indigenous peoples, cultures, and stories. As theater artists and storytellers, it is important to lift up the narrative of the land we occupy, especially when we gather in virtual space. We invite all participants to share the land that they're joining us from in the chat window. And then lastly, before I turn it back to Adrian, some of you know we recently created a Wingspace relief fund, which is a project of Wingspace and fiscally sponsored by Notch Theater Company to provide unrestricted rapid relief grants to New York City-based freelance designers and dramaturgs experiencing acute financial strain related to COVID-19. We thank you to everyone who has donated, especially recently on Giving Tuesday, and we are continuing to fundraise to attempt to meet the needs of everybody who's applied. So I will be putting a link to our relief fund in the chat window. Great, thank you. That's all from me. Back to Adrian.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So one of the things we've wanted to do for a long time with these salons is to gather groups of creators together One of the silver linings of this crazy pandemic that we're in the middle of is that this virtual world allows us to do that a little bit. So we couldn't be more excited to have this amazing group of artists here to talk about their work on Deep Blue Sea, a massive dance piece commissioned by the Park Avenue Armory that was to have performed there just a few weeks ago. Our panelists today are Bill T. Jones is the artistic director, co-founder, and choreographer for the Bill T. Jones Arnie Zane Company and artistic director of New York Live Arts. He is a recipient of the Doris Duke Artist Award, the National Medal of Arts, and was a 2010 Kennedy Center honoree. In addition to numerous Lortel Awards, he has won 2 Tony Awards, one for his choreography of Spring Awakening, and one for his choreography of the critically acclaimed Fela, which he also directed, co-created, and co-wrote. His groundbreaking body of work in dance has earned him the 2010 Jacob's Pillow Dance Award, the 2005 Wexner Prize, the 2005 Samuel H. Scripps American Dance Festival Award for Lifetime Achievement, and the Dorothy and Lillian Gish Prize, to name a few. In 1994, he received the MacArthur Genius Award, and the Dance Heritage Collection named him an irreplaceable dance treasure. Our next panelist is Elizabeth Diller, is a co-founding member of Diller Scofidio Renfro. Her cross-genre work has been distinguished with the first MacArthur Foundation Fellowship awarded in the field of architecture. She was named in Time's list of the 100 most influential people. She led 2 cultural works significant to New York, The Shed and the expansion of the the Museum of Modern Art. Liz also created, directed, and produced the Mile Long Opera, an immersive choral work staged on the High Line. Currently, she is leading the design of the Center for Music, a permanent home for the London Symphony Orchestra, and a new collection and research center for the V&A in London's Olympic Park. She is a professor of architectural design at Princeton University. Peter Nigrini, our next panelist, has worked with Bill T. Jones, Arnie Zane on Blind Date, as well as on Fela. Other Broadway designs include Beetlejuice, Ain't Too Proud, The SpongeBob Musical, and Dear Evan Hansen. Peter's designs include Grounded and Here Lies Love at the Public Theater, as well as work for Santa Fe Opera, Theater for a New Audience, the Brooklyn Academy of Music, Arena Stage, and Berkeley Rep, to name a few. Peter is a founding member of the Obie Award-winning theater company Nature Theater of Oklahoma, for which he has designed scenery, costumes, and lighting and projections for numerous productions. Awards include the first ever Drama Desk for Outstanding Projection Design and 2013 Hughes Design Award for Here Lies Love, and a special Lortel Award for Grounded. Nick Hallett has been collaborating with Bill T. Jones since 2014. His scores include all 3 evenings of the Analogy Trilogy, A Letter to My Nephew, and Fishkill Movements 1 through 45. He is the recipient of a 2017 Bessie Award for Best Revival with Ishmael Houston Jones and Miguel Gutierrez for variations on themes from Lost and Found, Scenes from a Life, and Other Works by John Byrne. His opera, Whispering Pines 10, a collaboration with artist Shauna Moulton, was presented internationally and earned the Duo Creative Capital Grant to be adapted for the internet. Our next panelist is Rob Wierzel. He's worked with artists in theater, dance, new music, opera, and museums on stages throughout the country and abroad. He has worked with Bill T. Jones Arnie Zane Company since 1985, including Still Here, You Walk, Last Supper at Uncle Tom's Cabin, The Promised Land, How to Walk an Elephant, We Set Out Early, Visibility Was Poor, and Fela, for which he received a Tony nomination. Outside of Robert's work for dance, outside of Robert's dance work, Robert's work for opera and theater has spanned the globe, including work for the Paris National Opera, New York City Opera, Glimmerglass Festival, Tokyo Opera, Seattle Opera, the Brooklyn Academy of Music, the Public Theater, and the Roundabout Theater Company, to name a few. Robert is currently on the faculty at New York University's Tisch School of the Arts and the Yale School of Drama. Thank you all. I also give a brief thank you to Kyle Maud from New York Live Arts for helping put this whole thing together, my co-conspirator in this whole thing. And let's get to this. That's enough of me talking. I'll just start this off by saying, I gather the last time all of you were together was it in North Adams, Massachusetts at Mass MoCA in the middle of January. And when we were all so rudely interrupted by this current state we're in. And I think the good part might be just to say, tell us about your process getting to Mass MoCA and where you left off, perhaps.
Well, I would say, first of all, whenever one accepts a commission from the Armory, you should realize it will change your life forever. Those of us who exist in the world of embodied performance, we don't really call it dance. We call it embodied performance or embodied investigation. It would be nice to rehearse in the space that you're going to be presenting it in. And that's not there. I challenge anyone within the New York area to find such a place that is the size of the Armory. So we have been spending a lot of time apart as a creative team because we had to go, the company had to go to the Manor Center in Jersey City. That was one of the places. We worked in our lovely theater, lovely studios upstairs at New York Live Arts and our theater, but they're all a fraction of the size of the Armory. So that's a way of saying that our work has been halting. And that was one of the things that was really great at Mass MoCA, because we were all beginning to think together. It wasn't, collaborators would oftentimes, there would be a libretto written, and I'm sorry we didn't invite our dramaturg, Mark Hairston, today. A libretto would be there. Then we would all sit around and have our questions about it, and then we would go away from each other for 4 or 5 months. So the company, of course, can't do that. We were continuing to make material, and proceed in a line of investigation that maybe was not contrary, but definitely running parallel to Liz and Peter. And I don't know how often Liz and Peter got together, or Liz and Peter or Robert, but I know Nick and I probably worked together more than everyone else. So that was part of what the process was, just trying to understand the scope of the thing, what its language was. Liz and Peter had some very audacious ideas, and the ideas were technically very challenging, which means that we were, any time that we could be rehearsing with those ideas was precious, and that was happening finally at our Mass MoCA residency. But we had really never been able to, well, other than a very important residency at a space in Catskill, New York called Lumberyard. We were able to get Peter's equipment in the air. I believe Liz and Peter were able to make some incredible discoveries about what we would be doing. That's how I understood it. That's how I understood what our process had been like.
I think it might be useful just to jump in briefly to describe from an overall design perspective what that interaction was, what our sort of mission brief was. At least from Bill mentioned a couple times about technology, and from a technological perspective, first and foremost, we wanted to use as much of the space at the Armory as possible. So we were looking at using initially the entire floor and then a slightly reduced, but still the bulk of the entire floor space there, which was, I think in the end, we were looking at a space that was about 150 by 100 feet. And the one of the primary things that we finally were investigating at Mass MoCA was that that entire surface would be projectable, and that a good portion of the illumination of the piece was provided by a combination of lighting and projection, and so that all of that creation process was very technically involved, and that's what we are, we managed to do it on a small scale at Lumberyard and at a near full scale at for 2 days until we were rudely interrupted at Massimoka.
It was only 2 days, wasn't it?
Maybe it was. It was 2. It was Thursday and Friday, right? I mean, I think it really was only 2 days.
It feels like it was like 4 to 5 days, but you're right. I think it was only 2.
Yeah. And so part of the challenge, in addition to the challenge that Bill speaks about, of the just being able to work at that physical scale on a floor that's of that size, the additional challenge was then being able to work with the dancers and with the dancers in conjunction with the technology. So not only do you need a space that large, you also need all of the money and resources and equipment to experiment at that scale.
I would also love to hear a little bit about the inspiration for the piece and how, having gotten the commission. I understand, Bill, that you
be careful what you wish for.
I think, I mean, because none of us have seen the piece, I think it would be nice to hear a little bit about where the piece was coming from. I understand that there was Moby Dick plays a role in the piece, with some inspiration for that. And I would love to hear you talk about that a little bit, just to give everybody a sense of where the piece is coming from. Yeah.
Well, I'll do my best and not to make it too dramatic, although the ideas in it are extremely personal and compelling to me because of a lot of things we're living through. My company had just done a 6-year work, which you mentioned, that Nick Hallett wrote the music for. It was called Analogy, 3 different parts. It was a wonderful work. When it was over, as I often feel, I thought, now would be a good time to think about doing nothing. Around that time, I was approached by the new director of the Armory, Pierre Audi, who said, we'd like to offer you a commission. And I said, whoa, well, maybe it's not time to stop. That space, many people in the field love that space. And I thought, what a wonderful opportunity. And around that time, and maybe Liz could fill in here, I had somehow or other Liz Diller, who I have great respect for, and I began to talk, and I asked her if she would like to help in this. And she was very enthusiastic about it. And of course, a room that size, I needed someone with her kind of command of space and what she has done in the theater. So it gave me confidence. With that, the question came from me, and maybe Peter and Liz, you can talk about that. One of the things that would have to be overcome in the Armory was that expanse, that huge expanse can eat up human beings. It's a drill hall after all. And a 10-member contemporary movement ensemble could be like nothing. So I thought I want someone that I trust who had a vision, and that would be Peter, and of course, an essential collaborator, Robert Wierzel. But Peter would help me draw on the floor. Peter would help direct the eye. Peter and Liz, maybe I'd like to hear how you two think about these things together. How do you direct the eye? Questions like, one of the things that we do, I am a formalist. I am interested in abstraction, but it's very important to be in touch with individuals. How do you feel them? So I would often say to Liz and Peter, and I think we were just closing in on it at Massimoka, how do you do intimacy there? I have some very small, fragile dancers who move beautifully. And a lot of what goes on in contemporary dance is not about extended figures, as you might see in the classical ballet stage, but the movement is very confidential, small, isolated. That's part of its charm. How does that read to a large room full of people? So once I understood that team, and of course, Nick, I was looking for I thought that Nick was done with me because he and I had 6 years of each other. And I thought, we both need a break. So I was looking high and low. I was going to go to pop music, Kendrick Lamar, Paul Simon, John Luther Adams, people like that to make the music. None of them panned out, fortunately. And Janet Wong, the company, said we did wonderful things with Nick. I said, I don't think he wants to do it. I went to him and he said, well, yes, I will do it. But what was the it? The it depended on something that we all would share, which would be the libretto. And the libretto was developed with Mark Hairston. And you're absolutely right. The Moby Dick was a rather ironic take on a great American classic. There are two great American classics. One of them is Martin Luther King, I Have a Dream, done in retrograde. And the other is a brief passage from chapter 93 of Moby Dick, Melville's Moby Dick. I began this piece with pain. When I was at Mass MoCA working in Nick Cave's installation, and I could do anything I want to, alone with the audience sitting around it, I decided to make a figure eight shape through the space and chanting as Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King suggested to me with this little black boy, Pip, the creation of Melville, it created the image of black men and myself as a black man in a white avant-garde. Therefore, how do you talk about loneliness? How do you talk about the recurring memory? And when you take a document like both Melville and Martin Luther King, they are so revered in American culture for reasons that are clear, but sometimes a bit sentimental, particularly the King. The King is a Black History statement, Black History Month statement. And I don't know how you all feel about Black History Month, but Black History Month is very easy to parody. It sounds like, what the fuck are you talking? Am I allowed to swear in this medium? Yeah. So what the fuck you mean by Black History Month? Why isn't every day Black History? I think it's the same thing with Women's Week and so on and so forth. So I was going to make a piece that started with one man, and not just any man, but a guy who was notorious for having been a troublemaker, having been biting the hand that feeds him. That's Bill T. Jones. And an old Bill T. Jones that has retired. And it would be walking and talking King, and then King would be interrupted by Melville describing in a loving way that oftentimes white liberals are about people of color, the little black was brilliant. And then he goes on to list all the qualities that Black people have, such as every day, Blacks should have a calendar with 365 4th of Julys and New Year's Day. Melville hadn't heard about stereotypes, but I took that and sort of used that to ram up against Martin Luther King, which is talking about we will all take hands. Peter and Liz had to come into this sort of stream of consciousness, highly emotional unraveling or discourse, and they had to sort of support the choreographic. I wanted them to support the choreographic foundation, which was a figure eight. Now they both said, oh my God, that's an infinity. Believe me, I never thought of it in being infinity. I thought of it.
Bill,
yeah.
Bill, can we get in there just for a little bit, for a moment?
Okay. All right.
Because I have to apologize. I had a big, technical problem, and I lost the conversation from when Adrian asked about when we were interrupted in the workshop, and you were starting to talk about how everyone's role. And if I could, because I'm going to have to depart at 7, but I wanted to just touch on that, and I wanted to touch on Pip and our first meeting before you went too deeply in. Is that possible?
Please.
Yeah. Okay. So I just want to say something about the workshop, and I don't know how much you guys discussed it before I was able to get back on, but the way the process worked over the 2 years we've been together is back and forth in a collaborative mode, adding more component parts, first very stripped down and then adding more component parts. And every time we were able to be together in the same room, we made huge advancements with or without the performers. But when we were together in a space where actually the performers could move and we could see everything in space, we built the pieces almost like a mosaic together in different parts over the course of quite a long span. And so that workshop was really the first time we were able to put the pieces of the mosaic together. And it was just weeks before we were to load into the Armory. And this was a point where the choreography, the music, the composition of the music, the sound design, and the video could all now be experienced together in one room. And we hadn't had that opportunity. So it was this fantastically climactic moment when we were putting it together, and all of a sudden we were sadly interrupted and we all had to go our ways. So I just wanted to just note that it was a time of synthesis, and I think that we managed to do a lot in that period, even a couple of days together.
Liz, what did you think you were being invited into? Liz, what did you think you were being invited into?
At the beginning, at the very beginning. Well, when you and I initially spoke, and you brought up Melville. That was the very first conversation, was Melville and Pip. And, I had read Moby Dick, it's seen the movie, and it's such a familiar classic that, I didn't really understand until I started to think about how strongly it figured into your initial thinking. And that was the moment that I got it, then combined with the Armory, the opportunity to work in such a gigantic and challenging space, that hooked me. And I just wanted, to pinpoint that moment, because this character in Melville is largely overlooked because he is it's not considered to be the center of the narrative arc, even though there's something incredibly important about this character that apparently is expendable at sea, a black boy that is, ultimately beautifully described in Melville, but it's very, very short moments and quotes. And when Bill pointed out this character that was a really, it seemed like a tertiary character, and it became kind of the seed of the whole piece. It was so powerful for me that's when I jumped in, because it was about this classic piece of fiction writing in which there is something that is so minor that became the center of the sort of critical thinking of the piece. So this solo individual boy, this black boy that was abandoned at sea, in the Armory, which is gigantic, there was that connection of abandonment and being alone, and this desperate moment of being at sea and seeing the horizon all the way around, and for which I think my first response was, the Armory isn't big enough to to sort of to understand that moment, that condition of abandonment. And that's when I started to really jump in, is how to make the Armory feel bigger than it actually is, that it was just not big enough. And that's when I think all of our discussions began, and we decided fairly early on that that the Armory wasn't going to be taking stage sets like in a conventional way. So the architecture and the space making there is created largely by light and video. And when Peter came in, this piece was evolving, and Peter came in, and then it was, very synthetic, and Richard as well, how all the pieces started to come together with a very, very minimal, and I would say almost bare space. But the sense of extreme expanse that's immersive for the audience was the challenge. And now Bill is bringing up the other challenge is intimacy. You know, how do you have this sense of expanse and intimacy at the same time? And that, you know, we are working in many other ways to do that with sound design and with the use of video. But we're elevating the audience in a way to sort of suspend them in the space to be able to look at the sort of combining stage and screen into one thing.
And it's probably important, Liz, to mention that we did a sort of a workshop 2 Januaries ago that was with the full complement of my company and the community, which makes, we want to be 100, but I think that we had maybe 80. And because we were able to be so free, the audience just sat in one row around the edge, which we all loved. But then there are these other factors that come into the design, which is that I don't know how, when did it become, when did the elevation of the chairs happen, and why were there so many chairs? Now those are fair design questions. Do you want to take that up? Because everything had been on the floor and we had liked it, but then as we worked on it, it became much more ambitious. How did all that happen, Liz? How do you remember that?
Well, so the way I remember it is when we decided to take on the challenge of this sort of immense space and to make the experience more immersive for the audience, we realized that this screen surface, the floor itself, in order to see it, you really have to be elevated to see it. The Armory has some sort of galleries around that you can, you know, one is accessible and others are less accessible. But we realized that we really wanted to put this piece in the round, and so the audience would be distributed, but a little bit higher up, and in order to get that perspective. And you know, this to the surface of the stage / screen. To do that, and then I won't give too much away because we use some interesting tricks to expand the space. But I'll say that the ability to look at the choreography from above allows us to see pattern and structure in a different way than we would see it perspectively from a seated audience member in one row. So that ability to sort of see the structure, and it was very important, I think, Bill's point about this multiplication. That's one of the things that we started. It was a single performer becoming multiplied by 10, which is basically the company, 10 members, and then multiplied by 10 again, 100 community members. So this sort of changing structure and the complex microstructures inside the choreography was really made sense to see it from the perspective of about 15 feet above the ground. You know, then there were the, you know, pragmatic elements of how many people, you know, we really needed to make a show, how big an audience, and that grew from the first supposition of about 600 to I believe 800 is where we ended up. So there are not very many rows, but there are several rows of tiered audience that's sitting in the round. I think, Bill, that's what created the problem of intimacy, that it was a trade-off, because your approach was to really look at the audience and to talk to the audience and to connect with them. And when the audience is, you know, sitting 10 feet, 15 feet above, there's less of that direct communication. And that's been a kind of friction in the piece and the trade-off.
Well,
But we were very
you know, and I
excited
think,
about it.
you know, I mean, the thing I would add is, I mean, friction and or tension. Like, I think that sometimes when it was, you know, those moments that worked best was when you felt that real tension between between the desire for intimacy, the desire to get close to an individual, and that space. You know, we often sort of would circle back to, you know, what is the experience of seeing a figure, you know, 130 feet away, on a plane. Like, that perception of the plane definitely changed the vantage. I think that some of what, Bill, you were speaking to about, you know, this sort of scope and progression, is some of it was like, so at its best, it's sort of like talking about the arc of history, you know, and that plane was fantastic for that, right? That it, you know, and so sometimes it was tension, sometimes it was opposition, you know, as we struggled through those things. But I think that contrast between the sort of epic and the personal was some of the power of using that space.
And Robert, do you have anything, or Nick?
Not yet. Maybe Robert.
Well, I would say, to add to that, you know, lighting is sometimes the last step, the step that, you know, kind of pulls all the energy together and is how it's finally revealed. In this case, with Peter and Liz's work, the projected image is doing so much of the work that one would assume lighting would do on such a scale. But there's one thing that I think lighting would do, and one thing we haven't really explored yet, because we, you know, can only happen in real time and real space, is the real-time perception that happens in the piece. You know, the energy, the light energy that comes out of our projectors, and how we see that over real time, over 90 minutes, you know, is about how we receive information and how focused we can stay on it, and where light energy that theater lighting can bring, that my part can bring, can keep that focus more alive at times. And we have specific moments where lighting would integrate with the image, but obviously with the floor being the world, the projection that we're in, lighting then has to be, you know, much more considered and exact. And we had started with a few ideas in the lumberyard, and I was about to come to Mass MoCA the next week before all of this happened, so I never actually got there, unfortunately. But that's the interesting part about what lighting can do, because it exists, you know, in it's wordless, right? So it's about perception and how you apply it.
Adrian, is it possible to see a few of the other photos of the light on the bodies of the performers?
Yeah, give me a minute. I'll show that right now. Yeah.
And Nick, you want to get in?
After you show some photos.
The only thing I'd throw in
why don't I say something then? You know, this tension that Peter is bringing up between the intimate and the spectacular, that's something that the creative process has kind of tracked. When I joined the project, we were thinking that the music would be purely technological. The music would be individual. The music would be invisible, excuse me. And that would really serve the design. But as we continued to develop the piece, that clearly wasn't satisfying. And so the music got more and more intimate. First, we were working with choral scores. And by the time we were at Mass MoCA, we were looking at a soloist and a vocal trio. And so I think that evolution really tracks this kind of tension that you're talking about.
It's interesting to think about, you know, the relationship between size and scale. And, you know, when you go from a place like Mass MoCA, which was maybe 80% of the size of the stage at the Armory, and, you know, any of the other rehearsal spaces that we've used, it's not only, you know, you know, that what you would imagine, the sort of the how the choreography has to adjust to that space, but it touches everything with the timing and the cues in the video and the lighting and all of that. So if it takes, let's say, the figure eight that Bill was talking about, that's one of the sort of principal, it's a kind of a physical armature of a lot of the movement. And if it takes Bill to do one of those figure eight loops, 4 minutes in the armory, it would maybe take 3.5 minutes in Mass Mocha, and in one of the other spaces, 2 minutes. And so that it changes absolutely everything. And that's, you know, what the point about it's performing at the armory is a blessing and a curse, but it's so hard to be able to imagine something, design something that is time-based in that space. You know, when you have to rehearse in the spaces as you're actually forming and building a project. So that has been a real challenge, because some things are scalable and some things are not scalable. Some increases are mathematic and some are, exponential. And so that's a kind of really interesting condition that we've had to face and work around.
And I think it's important to, as I was trying to talk us through the inspiration for the piece, there came a moment when I had the feeling that if we could not project, point a camera at a dancing person's face and make that face gigantic across the whole space, then I began to think about the thesis of the piece, dealing with this loneliness, dealing with the little black boy, dealing with Martin Luther King, Melville. And I was trying to get to Black Lives Matter. I was trying to get to Me Too. I was trying to get to the discussions that we've been having in our country around people with no voice wanting voice. So the Pip image becomes completely loaded, as he's this young boy who's abandoned in the ocean, and this young boy and Bill who feels a certain way. And I remember, where I'm trying to get to, Peter and Liz, is the day that I strongly urge that we have Black men's faces on the floor. And that was, so we're going to talk, that vocabulary of faces, which we're still trying to work through, and it goes through different changes, came out of conversations about the meaning of the piece and the dramaturgy. And also, I'd love it if you two could talk about how we got to that fantastic conception of a film. So, Black men's faces, the film. You're going to talk about those things?
Oh, the film meaning the live camera?
No, I mean the PIP 3, the ocean.
Water.
The water.
Oh, the water. Oh, okay. So we're actually describing the piece now. So I think the water was very, very early. The notion of filling the armory with the sea came fairly early, and I think that it's kind of natural if you think about an elevated position and just looking out to the horizon. So that the water combined with sort of extending the water perceptually through some devices, so it became a kind of starting point for that moment, that one sort of scene. There's a pivotal scene in Melville where the boy is abandoned at sea. And I don't remember the precise quote, but about that man is a mercantile animal or something like that. That
man is a money-making animal, which too often
yes.
Is
So the cost of a life, it was not, it was thought that the cost of a whale was going to be more important, the profit from a whale than the cost of a life. And so anyway, so this was sort of a key moment in the novel that was so resonant and that had to be part of the piece. So that's where the video comes in. And we don't, we have to play a kind of fine line between literalness and abstraction, because the piece is quite abstract. There are moments of sort of reference to the sea. The sea is referred to throughout the piece in many different ways, also, through the composition. But we don't. There's a passage in which we actually are immersed in this video.
And some of it was about a choice, if I might. Let's just in a way to run headlong into the expectation, right? I mean, you're doing Melville, you're doing a piece called Deep Blue Sea, and I think very early, you either just need to run headlong into that expectation, and then in the manifestation of that idea, confound it, or avoid it altogether. And we spent some time talking back and forth about those two possibilities, and ended with the notion that there was a way to sort of run headlong into that expectation and still avoid it being the expected.
And how is humanity being treated, guys? I mean, that's what I'm talking about. That humanity, the specificity.
So to come back to the sort of the essence of the piece, and to come back to Pip and the first suggestion of it, the piece always was political. It was just with this sort of character that kept ringing in our ears. Those, some of Melville's words ringing in our ears. I immediately understood that this piece for Bill was more than just coming back to do one more piece because of the Armory. It was a very important piece for him politically, and as a Black man, as a Black choreographer, and his own story. And Bill, that you will always, you will not agree with that this is autobiographical. I think that it is very broad about thinking about exclusion, and in your particular case, I mean, that's this sort of resonance with Pip and Bill as being maybe an interchangeable character sort of started right from the beginning. I think the questions that the piece continue to pursue, it was really walking a tightrope between politically a very strong political piece and a piece of abstract choreography, and this is a tightrope walk, I think. And Bill is able to do that in his work. Magically he's able to do that in his work. It's the first time I've worked with him, and it is really a very interesting kind of complicated problem, is how to make that balance really work. And so as and Bill, you can explain this more, but the beginning with Martin Luther King and Kid,
what the hell are you
definitely a race. It was an issue that was primarily about race, but then it expanded into gender, into all sorts of every different marginalized communities, and this became very important. The Black men's faces was something that we wanted to sort of carry the politics, in a way that also worked with the extreme size of the space. And I think that there was, I don't even remember, but there was we also were working with a live camera and faces of the performers, and there's a lot of sort of interesting play between speech, and also there are different forms of text. So there's the direct address of Bill to the performers, and Bill sort of all the way through. Bill recounting stories, almost like a narrative style, and there are also quotes from Melville. So there are three different types of that we see and perceive and hear words, and also, of course, lyrics that Nick so beautifully started to integrate as the piece maybe moved away from solely electronic to voice, and to in the solo singers and to lyrics. And so there are these multiple ways that words come through. But the politics of the piece, I would say, was sort of growing, expanding, and having more presence, more of a footprint in the piece as we continued.
And I think, to speak to Bill, your insistence on those faces, I mean, I think it was an important sort of gauntlet to have thrown down, to sort of how do we strike that balance between access to the individual, access to humans, And the two instances we had achieved by the time we paused our process were in the first case a rather formalist presentation of faces of Black men near to the beginning of the piece, and then a much more rugged representation of the ensemble of performers, and that in that case with a live camera. And I think that there was that sort of spoke to the tension and the journey across the piece, where in a way I think it was the introduction of humanity and more people was a key sort of journey that the visual world also became more rough, more responsive, more improvisational. At least where we got to, culminating in this sort of live camera event, which was incredibly rough, and giant sweaty performers' faces, 150 feet across on the floor of the Armory.
And I think that one thing, Adrian, I think I'd like to point out here is that this work was always designed in the end to be in a huge space with a large popular audience. Now, I mean popular. In my mind, that means a large, diverse, racially diverse audience. Therefore, that's why I would have problems with the idea of being autobiographical, because for some people, if they heard this conversation we're having right now, many people, Black people, they would think, well, what does this have to do with me? But when you see a piece and you're hearing gospel music and you're hearing you're seeing Black faces, I believe that this idea of the we is being challenged. So my designers, it was very important that we understand at a certain point that we have got to create an experience that in the end, people are going to feel like they're, not that they're going to church, but they're going to some place to bear witness. And they bear witness to what? That beauty exists. You can make a whole piece, I'm sure. Everybody here is very talented. They can make a piece that was purely abstract with sound and light. It's true, right? But then what is it about the time that we live in where we really don't hang out very much together? Now, here, if we have time, the conversation should now curve, because we're in the middle of a lockdown. So the payoff in Deep Blue Sea is when the stage is now being shared with not only myself and my professional dancers, but 80 people from the community. And we want it as diverse a group as possible. For me, it's always good that it's more weighted toward the people of color, because that's a very unusual thing in my world, And I thought that that's one thing we were working toward. How can we make an event that actually is beautiful to look at, thoughtful, and yet it moves you? Like you feel, what does it mean to be we now? What does it mean really to be we? And can artists actually create spaces like that for large groups of people? I mean, we do it, my theater downtown, the New York Live Arts Theater, is a beautiful 184 seat, one of the most beautiful stages for viewing movement in the city. But oftentimes it's very difficult to get it mixed enough for me. Get the right people in the room saying, yeah, I get it, as opposed to, that's rather interesting. But how, because to get people who are saying, yeah, amen, hey, yeah, that's very expensive. And that's what I wanted this team to do. And that's where all the design choices are still trying to solve problems in that way. But that's the biggest one right there. What was it that Duchamp said? I always attribute this to him. Duchamp said, art comes in through the eyes and goes to the brain. And I say it comes in through the eyes, goes through the brain, and if it's really good, it hits the heart. Now, modernism has a spotty record with getting to the heart. A lot of important time is spent in the brain. But how do we do that? And therefore, it had to have, I wanted people to know a Black person was behind this. Now, here we are talking about design, so I'm bringing it to this kind of crass place. Maybe it's crass, but how you say, you look at my collaborators, how can we all feel? Can we all feel the funk? Can we all feel what it's like to have someone's foot on your fucking neck? Can we all feel? How do we do it? That we can all feel what it means to be incarcerated. And now we are look what we are, look what we're at. And by the time this piece is shown again, will we even be able to have that many people together in one room? So the piece is still working for me, still in development. And I'm honored to be working, but there's a conversation, a big conversation. It's still going on as this piece is completed. What does that last section now mean?
You know, I wanted to just jump in for a moment on that the challenge of this as a highly, emotional piece. It's a piece that, you have to really pay attention to it and understand, who's on the stage and understand the words. Words matter. They're not just in the air and float away as decoration or as just sound. They're very meaningful. And in fact, the piece, had a lot more words. It's been edited and edited and edited, and many sources that have been edited and edited. But the sort of the words have always mattered a lot. And I was just thinking as we're sort of talking about how the piece has started to become synthesized. It's a little bit like making a movie, and actors are doing their scenes, and it's not until the editor gets in there and you see the whole thing put together that actors understand what those speaking lines meant when they were filming that scene. This is a little bit this process has been so much a kind of assembly of component parts that the one thing that I have to say is the glue that brings it together emotionally is the music. And I think Nick has done, really brilliant job. I mean, he's still very much in the process, and and it needs to be finished. And we were working, we were starting to hear everything for the first time, starting to come together. And I have to say that, that in this case, there was a real turning point for me, at least, and I think it will be for the audience hearing it. That sense of intimacy, the soloists, the solo instruments, when the sort of play of sort of making the space, the atmospherics, and from the abstraction to the atmospherics. I don't know, Nick, maybe you can say a little bit about how you started to talk about the challenge of, as the lyrics start to come in, as the soloist and the intimacy. I think that has been a work in progress and in real time for all of us. But I just think that Bill, in response to the emotional content, I think that it contributes gigantically to it.
One second, Nick, before you say something. Liz, I understand you have to leave at 7 or sometime soon, so I'm going to say thank you and take your leave whenever you
okay,
leave.
thank you, everyone. Great to be together again. And I'm going to, I just want to hear Nick's response, and then I'm going to leave the discussion.
Well, I will say I have as much of a challenge as Bill has given me to bring the funk. I also have 6 years of experience working with him. And so this idea of Bill's interest in Eurocentric art, but also where we can find a Black vernacular experience in that is something that Bill has tasked me with for several years. So in this piece specifically, I've had to deal with my own white fragility to bring that funk to this piece. How can I, as this queer Jewish composer, help create a Black space? So part of what I have done is I have cast a team of entirely people of color to help render that music authentically. Bill wants gospel music. We're bringing in gospel singers to sing it. And I think, Liz, that's one of the things that you were just starting to get to hear were those voices. And they bring in a tremendous amount of intimacy and authenticity to the picture. As I said previously, when we were working with this idea of invisible music, we couldn't have that. We couldn't hear that. So I think that speaks to the payoff that we were just about to hear.
Well, you know, I think it's interesting what you're saying, Nick, also about like, I mean, the way that as we progressively add these components, and it's something that happens so often in the theater, right? That we begin in a rehearsal room with a limited or a subset of all of the final elements. And it's interesting and in a way sort of unfortunate how distorting that experience is, right? It's sort of like when we were looking at the visual landscape and ideas for that visual landscape devoid of those aspects of the performance, I think we were a lot more concerned about how do we find the humanity, right? And it's like some of the answer was, well, when Nick shows up with, you know, with some people of color to perform the music, and like, that's where it all comes from, right? It doesn't need to come from the visual landscape because it'll be in the oral landscape. And that way that we are, I think this production sort of exacerbated that, both about the sort of extended time frame that we were rehearsing in and the difficulties of space and the technical integrations and the financial problems, you know, that result from needing, you know, a half dozen projectors at any given moment to begin looking at the visual world. It sort of exacerbated that, but I think it's true in every production, except, you know, at least in my mind, those sort of miraculous, perfect German productions where they are you know, before they begin rehearsal, they, you know, set up an entire production and you're doing the entire production with every single person in the room from the get-go. I mean, I'm not sure they actually do that anymore either, but I dream that they do.
Where's the funk?
Yes. That's what Wagner was saying way back when.
Yeah.
Where's the funk?
Wo ist der Funk?
One of the things that keeps coming up is how you guys have integrated text, and Elizabeth talked about it a little bit, and we saw some in that image. I was wondering, Nick, if you could talk a little bit about the text. I gather that there is sung parts, and maybe Peter, talk about the text that you've included in your work. I'm just curious what, since there is so much text around this with Martin Luther King Jr. and
Herman Melville.
And Herman Melville.
Well, I will say one of the things that has come up in the vocabulary that Bill and I have been developing over the past several years is the power of spoken text to kind of resolve into song. And in Bill's landscape, which is a primarily abstract one, we find openings. Bill calls them opportunities. Like, Nick, is there an opportunity for a song here? And any opportunity for a song is one I'd like to take, because I am ultimately I'm a songwriter in an experimental composer's body, or an experimental composer in a songwriter's body. So I really, really like bridging that gap. How can a song really, really bring us to a place that we call home, a place that feels familiar? But how can that song exist within a bigger landscape? So clearly, we've talked about some of these pieces of text being seen, and that's in Peter's world. And then we can bring the text into my world and what it means to hear these narratives sung by one voice, because that's a very, very powerful storytelling device in theater.
But Nick, about me asking you to have the dancers singing.
Oh, well, that's another big detail in terms of our collaboration. When I started working with Bill, the initial challenge was to get the company to sing. Bill had recently eliminated the word dance from the title of from the company's title. And so over the course of several years of work, I came up with a vocabulary, a musical vocabulary that I thought could pass along well to inexperienced vocalists. But how can we do that in an advanced way without compromising the music? And I learned a lot from that. So when it came time for Deep Blue Sea, and we had some company members whose voices I knew and understood, I pounced on the opportunity to write songs for them. And we've always found places for the company to vocalize and for the company to really express all aspects of performance.
Mm-hmm. Do we have the long shot of the Armory with Vincent singing over it?
Yeah, I was actually just pulling that up. I'm going to play it right now. Give me a second.
Can I set it up? I'll set it up by saying that this is something that came from the libretto, but it was inspired by something that was supposed to be, and it is, but it's a projection. We see this text projected, and I took the text that we saw projected and I set it to song. How's it feel to be a problem? Remember. How will it feel to be a problem? Remember loneliness. How will it feel to be a problem? Cast away. How will it feel to be a problem? Lonely. We cannot turn back. We cannot walk alone.
Sorry about that, Nick. I didn't know turning off my microphone was going to turn off the sound. Thank you. That was beautiful. I was going to just segue also to, we're going to go to some questions quickly, but one of my first questions, if anybody has a question, you can either put it in the comments or raise a hand on the Zoom chat in the sidebar. One of the things I also wanted to just say was in this process before you got to North Adams and kind of how and the collaborative process before that, what were the kind of modes? I mean, in terms of thinking about a piece this big and thinking about kind of how you share where your thinking is. What were the modes that you were working with in terms of getting communication back and forth, and in terms of in terms of material? Normally one would go perhaps see a video from a rehearsal or attend a rehearsal. I understand, Nick, you usually spend time with Bill in rehearsal composing as he's working. Is that correct? I'm curious with something this big, how that works.
Peter, didn't you, every time that you and Liz would spend time, you would make quite a few scratch recordings, oftentimes from the top, right? And you would study those.
We did a lot of studies. I mean, it's interesting specifically about this piece. It is both to portions of the choreography. One aspect of the choreography are these big sort of structural, sort of really plan view ideas. I mean, you know, it reminds us that it's a drill hall, right? Like there are moments in the choreography that you're like, oh yeah, we are in a drill hall, aren't we? And this is what I would expect to see. And so a lot of the work that Liz and I were doing, because we were forced to work out, you know, essentially without the tools of the design for much of the time, either because we weren't in the room or even on many occasions when we could get a large enough space at Mana or at the Armory, the time and resources involved in building out a system to actually rehearse was prohibitive. So that we would work with these plan view recordings, and it was a combination of an incredibly detailed storyboarding process, as well as essentially composing a projection design on top of a plan view recording. I mean, what was very useful is that plan view recording was in some ways a rather accurate representation just of the mechanics of the production. You know, they were incredibly useful, although I have to say, I think they were more useful for Liz and I as a tool for us to prepare for the moment we would be in the room than they were as a tool to communicate with Bill or some of the other collaborators, because I think they lived very much in the abstract. I mean, I think that's also the way you felt, Bill, right? Like often you look at these and you're like, yes, and then that's fine. You've done your homework. That's good.
However, I must say that seldom I don't know how my colleagues in the choreographic world feel, but I've never had such beautiful storyboards. I mean, literally, this is a major architectural firm, and when they show us where this figure is going to be at this moment, it was pages and very meticulously. I was actually learning how my collaborators saw the work. Sometimes I was frustrated because I felt that they were not able to feel it like with dance eyes. They felt with visual artist eyes, which is okay. And but those storyboards were so useful to us, really useful.
Yeah. And I think, you know, the challenge is, you know, and this is a challenge I find, you know, certainly working largely with projection, the developmental time is so large that you have to be working that far in advance. You have to be working in the abstract. You have to be working with storyboards, with all these sort of schematics, and they the grave risk in them is that they feel bloodless, right? I mean, they are absolutely funk free. And the challenge is how to develop that as sort of a scaffolding. And then when you arrive at the space, sort of put the flesh and bones and blood and guts on that scaffolding. And that's that delicate balance. And every once in a while you have to break a leg or two off your scaffolding when it's, you know, but I think that's often the challenge, and it's the challenge I find in so much of my practice is how do you build the means that once you're in the room, you can use that precious time, you know, as efficiently as possible, and, you know, pump blood into the veins of this thing.
I was really impressed at Lumberyard when one day I was saying, "Oh, Peter, we need color," and then Peter goes over and does this kind of talk with his people, great people in his crew, and there's color. I mean, I wanted it quickly, but I didn't. When I got it, I was surprised that you could cover an area that big with color just with taking the time to, quote, key it all in, which I don't trust. I'm barely literate, but that was great. The technology really was wonderful in that regard.
Well, and I think, you know, speaking of technology, I don't, it's mostly not a very exciting thing to talk about, but just for a basic framework about what we were doing, as we said, the projection system covered the entire floor area, the danceable floor area that we were using at the Armory, and we were gathering position information for all of the dancers, so that we knew where every dancer was in 3D space at all times. And I would say 90% of the projection design was driven by that information, so that what we were building is a sort of machine for the dancers to perform in and with, so that many of the visual compositions we were making were actually about taking the movement of the dancers and extending it across the space. So, in the simplest version, you might have a line of dancers, and we would be casting a line across the floor of the Armory that passed through the dancer at either end of that line. And that was a very simple version, but it was about, in a way, giving. It was some of our goal about how do you fill the space, right? That how do you take the motion of a single figure and all of a sudden give the dancer the capacity to make a gesture that could extend across the entire space of the Armory, or at least the company could make a gesture that extended across that entire space.
I'd like to open it up to any questions on the floor. One quick one was just popped up on the comments. Will Deep Blue Sea be rescheduled at Mass MoCA? Inquiring community dancers would like to know, from Laura Gonzalez.
Kyle, we haven't mentioned the fact that the piece has been rescheduled.
We have not yet mentioned that. I'm still here.
Are we supposed to be doing that?
We are in the process of rescheduling Deep Blue Sea at the Armory, and I think that I also just want to have a shout out to the rest of our commissioners and people who have supported this project, because some of them have had to cancel, a lot of them have been able to postpone. So the Park Avenue Armory will postpone. We don't have a date to announce yet. Another commissioning partner, the Holland Festival, has had to cancel their festival, but they are moving to a digital format in the month of June. Other co-commissioners, the Manchester International Festival will hopefully still happen. The Mann Center in Philadelphia will be postponed, who's getting lead support from the Pew Arts and Culture, Heritage and Culture. And so we're hopeful that the majority of things can be rescheduled, but of course, we're in a time of uncertainty right now.
And we would love to be able to go back and continue that date we had with Mass MoCA, but I don't know if that's in the stars right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll do our best to get there, whoever asked that question.
I was going to ask Robert quickly. Robert, you've been working with Bill for since 1985. I'm just curious for your thoughts on how this piece fits in with all of your work together, and how you guys have how your language has evolved as a team collaborating together.
Oh, that's an interesting question. I don't know if I can articulate how it's evolved. It's just evolved. You absorb things. Having worked with Bill and Arnie over all these years, it changes the nature of who you are, changes the nature of how you see, how you perceive work, and that's something that I've kind of learned over those years. So clearly, Bill's is a visual artist. And the visual artist happens to use a big three-dimensional space that we call the theater. And it's one of the things I found most satisfying in all the work we've done is like you can only do so much in a rehearsal room, with one group of people, when you have to bring the rest of the mix in and put it in a stage where you can bring in all the elements and put it together like we're doing. It just happens to be a very large version of that, a large scale version of that. It becomes a little bit, Bill, I don't know if you agree with this, unspoken, we have a way of speaking or a conversation, a dialogue that is, goes on even though we may not see each other for months on end, and we walk into the room and here we are, we begin. Like you know, I've been cleaning up my studio, and I found, you know, I've been reorganizing all this work, and I'm finding all this work from, you know, 1985 and the 80s, and just watching how the way we make work now is so different, and it's gotten so you know, in such a great way. So I find it incredibly satisfying and fulfilling, and so which is why, you know, these relationships last so long, because they speak to the core of what we do as artists and what's so important.
And Robert, wouldn't you say that we have, for the most of our creative time together, it's been in, do I dare say, proscenium stages?
Yeah.
We haven't worked a lot in non-proscenium environments like the Armory. We have done some things, and that's always exhilarating and a little frightening, because Robert is a supremely masterful designer of stage lighting. I mean, he understands what side lights and understands the effects you get with lights behind and in front. But you sort of wonder. I'm getting a note here from my companion downstairs. It just reminds us, Robert and I, that we worked at the Palais the Palace of the Popes in Avignon, which was a stage that was gigantic, like the Armory, but it was also equipped to feel like a proscenium. But every time we do that, we work in a non-traditional space, it really tests our vocabulary. Wouldn't you say, Robert?
Yeah. Yes, it's about how defining, you know, like, you know, site-specific work. Like, what does that really mean? Like, you know, how can you best reveal and speak to the piece through light in this space that's not about the formal view of a frame? You know, it comes to mind, Bill, at the Louvre. God, I'm blanking.
Walking the line.
Walking the line. Yes.
Walking the
completely,
line,
you know,
it was a solo at the Louvre.
Yeah, it was fantastic. Really, really powerful. So yeah, Bill, but that's true. But that's what is so great about it. You push, and that, you know, moves one into another, moves me into another frame of mind, which, you know, is always fulfilling.
Robert, just for, I don't know what's our time like, but could you just tell us about what the load in at the Louvre was? Remember, we could only work from such and such to such and such, but we had such an ambitious idea. What you want to talk about that?
Those of you that know the Louvre, if you're standing in front of the Louvre and you're looking at the pyramid, it's to the right, it's the Denton wing, where we have the dying slave. It's all the early sculpture, and it follows all the way up through all those galleries up to the, I want to say, the Venus de Milo on the stairs.
No, right? The Wing Victory.
Wing Victory, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
And well, because it's a museum, we had, things couldn't be left around. We had to, like, basically load in and out each time, and so it was quite challenging to come up with a way of working to make that happen. And we got to work very late at night, which was thrilling, to be in that amazing museum with no one else, you know, around at, you know, 2 a.m. And then, but we did it, and, you know, I was able to, you know, with the great team there, make it work. But it was, you know, fascinating, because some of the restrictions of how you had to do also helped shape the way the piece was revealed and the way it was shaped. And so that was, you know, found space. That's what makes it so great.
Mm-hmm.
It was something I wanted to say earlier that was about lighting. I mean, lighting was a real puzzle for this piece. I think it remains a puzzle
Mm-hmm.
for Deep Blue Sea in some ways, because to some degree the design brief that we came up with, sort of our mandate, made it, I think, unintentionally. I mean, I don't think we were aware of where we were headed when we made this choice, but it sort of flipped the relationship between projection and lighting on its head, such that that very often, if you think about the two in relation to each other, lighting is sort of the ground and projection becomes the figure, right? And that you can depend on lighting being the steady state, and then maybe there is the light of projection that's added on to that. And in this case, it almost inverted in that way. And we started looking at how theatrical lighting really became an intervention into what was the ground, the visual ground of the piece.
Mm-hmm.
And to some degree, that was incredibly exciting. It was also terrifying because all of a sudden, you know, Liz and I were faced with the box that we had painted for ourselves, which was this responsibility for big portions of the piece, because of the way we were trying to build it, that we also needed to light the figure. And you know, I spent much of my time trying to think up what Robert Wierzel would do and how to translate the function of lighting, about the function of lighting to pull focus and guide the eye and reveal figure and all those things that are what a lighting designer is going to do, and trying to translate those into essentially a different form, because we were responsible for doing that for a portion of the piece with projection that was from a fixed angle and with limited access to the sort of dynamic range of intensity. We certainly had access to it, but not of the scale that theatrical lighting can bring. And so it sort of became a challenge of how do we address all of those things that you would expect theatrical lighting to do with different tools and in a different way, and not just reproducing how light will function, but reproducing at a more basic level of like, well, we can't use angle to define a figure, so how else do we do it? You know, or, you know, the basic way that the evolution of lighting can refresh the eye, refresh our ability to perceive something. How do we do that when we don't have access to all of the conventional tools of lighting? And, you know, the time that Robert and I spent together at Lumberyard, where we were both sort of hobbled by the technology we had, but there was something there. You know, I spent a lot of time looking for Robert to tell me about the success of my work, or lack thereof, you know. And
which is true. No, and what you do is that the lighting, you know, once the Lumberyard was very informative because, you know, it's projected image. It's not just light. It's what you say, Peter. It has to be both. And so what I learned from that is like, oh, projectors are doing this, so lighting needs to add another layer, another color, and that's where we are headed. We'll be heading. And that's what makes it, you know, because what is your work is light. It's the same way. It's just, you have a much more sophistication in detail but also light can bring a certain, you know, thickness, energy, psychic energy that is different from projected image. So
well, it reminds me of the Deal of the Devil. I was struck by this similar problem on a piece I did at the Public with Chris Ackerland, and there also the entire floor surface was a projected image, and it was in the Ansbacher. So there's the two onstage columns, and Chris, being Chris, you know, thought, well, shouldn't there be one very large, very bright fixture upstage left, and he would turn it on and it would cast this sort of fantastic light across the space. It would also cast the shadow of the column. And there was this sort of incredibly telling moment. It was Julie Taymor directed it, and there was this moment where she walked up to me and she said, "Why is there a black line on the floor? Why have we drawn a black line on the floor?" And it was like, well, we hadn't drawn a black line on the floor. It was a shadow, you know. But I bring it up not to point out that, you know, she hadn't perceived the technical difference, because what she had perceived was the way we were looking at this space. The floor now was an image, and where without projection, the floor wouldn't have been an image, and that would have been light, and that would have been a shadow, and it would have made perfect sense. The minute we say the floor is something else, it is not only a floor, but it is also a plane of image, then no, that's not the shadow of the column. It's a piece of the composition. It's a line that's been drawn on the floor.
So did you accept it? Did you accept it, the line?
Well, it wasn't for me to, I mean, I said, that's a good question, Julie. And then, yes, ultimately Christopher accepted it. But it was true. You had made that concession. That's then those are the rules, because that's the way the work we're making is being perceived. regardless of whether it's technically true or not. That's what an audience is going to see.
Right.
I think I've got one final question. We're going to wrap up in a few minutes, but I do one question which was related to one that I was curious about as well, from Anna Driftmeyer in the audience. I'm going to add to it a little bit. You know, with this pandemic and this lockdown and this kind of heightened sense of solitude and the other and where we are in society, all these things echo. It sounds like they echo in the piece. Bill, you've kind of alluded to this a little bit. Mm-hmm. In this pause, have you, as collaborators, have you thought about reconsidered any parts of the piece, and do you think you might be reconsidering any parts of the piece as it evolves into its next incarnation?
Well, this conversation was really useful because, you know, we haven't had a chance to speak, and I am curious to know what my collaborators are thinking, how we will probably be somewhere in the first half of next year, right? Where will the country be, and what things are obsolete now, I don't know if that's a word, and what things actually will have been prescient. I'm curious to see. We haven't had a chance really to work together. Other than these little boxes. Peter and I had a conversation a few weeks ago, Nick and I as well, but yeah, that's my feeling on it. Have you guys had mind space to even think about Deep Lucid?
Well, I've had just a little because I've been very consumed with, you know, this technology and the, you know, other parts of my life. But do think the work, you know, working on our other work, Bill, you know, what problem and all, you know, the piece, you know, it has such a formality like we've been talking about. And now I'm wondering if, you know, and especially finding the heart in it, which is something we just were starting to really talk about. And that maybe that the light we need to, maybe in section 3, which is the part we're still working on in a bigger way, or at least in my mind, that there should be a larger theatrical gesture, maybe that has that really shifts and breaks the rules that we set up. Of course, Peter, I haven't discussed any of this with you or Liz, but that has been something I've.
And Robert, you never heard Peter and Liz's ideas for the third section.
Well,
they have very specific lighting ideas.
Yes, I know. But
exciting.
Right, and we will, and I'm happy and excited to hear them. It's, you know, in a way, this stop that we've all had to deal is now actually will make the piece richer in some way.
And so the only thing I would say is that this piece started out as a work that was in pursuit of the we. Did I ever think that we would have discovered we in the way that we have? We are all, the whole planet sort of ground to a stop. It's astounding. Yeah. And my connection to the grocery person is now clearer than ever. And the fact that I can't be with you, my collaborators, is really clear. And I think this is the new normal. So stay tuned.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to, unless there are other questions that pop up, I don't see any right now. I'd like to thank all of you, Bill T. Jones, Robert Wierzel, Peter Nigrini, Nick Hallett, and Elizabeth Diller, who unfortunately had to leave. This couldn't have happened, unfortunately, without this bizarre situation that we're all in. But we're all the luckier for it, for just this one little thing at least. I think if anybody wants to stay, this chat will stay open for a little while now. People can turn on their video, and our panelists are welcome to stay, but you're free to go. I'm going to add one little thing here, just to keep in mind. Next Thursday on May 14th, we'll have another Salon. I think Elizabeth mentioned this. Another process stopped. Rocky Horror Picture Show with Sam Pinkleton, Ani Taj, Ada Westfield, and David Reynoso. That'll be on the 14th at 7 p.m. So keep an eye out for that. An interesting group of collaborators there as well. And yeah, thank you again. And we're all eager to see and hear this piece. And Kyle and everybody at New York Live Arts, and everybody at Diller Scofidio for helping make this happen. I want to say thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.